of a longer topic than 6 minutes, but is training in zone two versus training more like maybe a race pace. How do you've done tons of races in the past, and I'm just going to just straight up, I hear like 80% of your miles in zone two. I've heard that from a bunch of runners. I've heard that from cyclists and everything like that. I have a hard time personally, like wrapping my head around spending that much time in such a low heart rate zone when you're actually on race day way above that. Convince me as to why zone two is super important as the foundation of your cardio training.
Totally. Yeah. Great question. So the best way to think about this is a triangle, right? And if we think about a triangle, right, you've got three sides, you've got the bottom, and then you've got the two sides here, right? The bottom of the triangle, that base, we're going to call that our zone two training, right? The peak of the triangle, the tip is going to be our VO2 max, right? So our VO2 max is that higher end. We do want our VO2 max to increase, right? We want to build this triangle taller. That's the goal. The more aerobically fit you are, the taller your triangle is going to be, right? In this analogy, okay? The problem is that if we don't first have a foundation, a base, as we build up that triangle taller and taller and taller, what happens to the triangle? It becomes way less stable, right? So if we have a very narrow base and a very tall triangle, that is not easily knocked over. Versus if we have a very wide base, we have much more room to build that triangle taller.
So when you say like, I can obviously see it from a triangle analogy standpoint, but when you say it's you have a weak base and you get knocked over, what does that actually like mean from a standpoint of yeah.
Yeah, I think it can be a lot of different things. Like I think it ultimately comes to like our race day performance. It can really come down to that. It also comes down to our body and our tissue's ability to recover. Like let's go back to our first conversation when we talk about recovery time. Here's what a lot of people don't realize, Nick. When you go through a hard zone 5 VO2 max workout, how long do you think that takes to recover from?
Yeah. Oh
Before you're fully back, before your tissues have completely healed and you're fully back from that workout, it takes most runners 10 to 14 days to be fully back from one VO2 max workout. And so the higher your heart rate zone is, the longer it takes to recover. So now what ends up happening is we're robbing Peter to pay Paul in our training if we're doing too much high heart rate zone training. So we're borrowing and we're robbing ourselves of performance in our following workouts when we keep hammering the heart rate at such a high level. And so the key thing is with those zone 2 runs, it's a way more gradual climb to the top of that triangle, right? It's way more gradual. It's a slower journey, right? But it is a much more sustainable one, from a big picture standpoint, right?
Yeah. When we say zone 2, we'll wrap it up here. When we say zone 2, do you think about that as 60 to 70% of your max heart rate? Do you think about it more from a standpoint of like conversational pace? Like you can hold a conversation, you wouldn't really want to, but you could if you had to. How do you or do you think about it in relationship to like comparing it to what your race pace might be and it's like a minute and a half slower than that? Or how do you go about personally thinking about zone 2 training?
Yeah, great question. The best way to do it is with a heart rate monitor. And unfortunately, like the wrist wearables typically are not accurate enough to really dial this in. The standard for it is to get like a chest strap. A polar chest strap monitor is going to be your gold standard there. And the way that we find that zone, it's 180 minus your age is a rule of thumb, right? So if you're 30 years old, 180 minus 30 is 150, right? And so 150 would be your lactate threshold. In other words, it is the highest level in your body, the highest heart rate level that you can sustain before our body starts producing lactate or lactic acid, which is a waste product. It's also a fuel as well, but we don't have time to get into that. But it is the highest level that you can sustain at that zone 2 or at that aerobic effort before we start getting anaerobic, before we start getting into that waste production. And so in other words, to make it most simple, it's the highest heart rate level with the most efficiency. In other words, it's the most efficient heart rate zone for you to run in. You can sustain that for like the longest period of time and cover the most amount of distance.
Wow, that's awesome. That's awesome. That is a very, in 6 minutes, you did a damn good job of breaking that down simplistically and really providing the why behind it. So I really appreciate that.